5 plants in a particular area of the garden. So anthers from plant 1 moving to stigma of plant 3, but they are the same type of plant. For instance, hibiscus undergo cross-pollination. You can look at this diagrammatic illustration, discover that they are different plants, but it's not the same plant, but it's the same species of plant, the same kind of plant, but it's not on the same stock of plant. So anthers move from this plant A to plant B, but the plants are the same. Then we want to talk about the characteristics of self-pollinated flowers. What characters do they have that makes them to undergo self-pollination? First, the stigma and the anther of a bisexual flower ripe or mature at the same time. That is why they can undergo self-pollination. When the stigma and the anther are ready at the same time, they are mature at the same time, so they can undergo self-pollination. And that process or that phenomenon, when you have stigma and anther maturing at the same time, is called homogamy. Homogamy is the process whereby the stigma and the anther of a bisexual flower, that is, the flower has both the male and female reproductive system on it, but both of them mature at the same time. That's what we call homogamy. Then another characteristics that self-pollinated flowers have is that both the pistil and the stamens are enclosed in the corolla, so they are kind of confined together. So it makes it easy for them to self-pollinate, to pollinate each other. Then the ripe pollen grains, therefore, are discharged on the stigma at the same time. Since it doesn't cost it anything, the pollen grains that are enclosed in a stamen with the pistil can easily fall on the pistil. Then the anthers may be situated above the stigma. When the anther is above and the stigma is below, so the pollen grain can easily fall down on the stigma. Another thing is that when the anther is situated above the stigma, as in the case of tubular flowers, whose anthers are crowded together, it is easy for self-pollination to happen. Then also, when the filaments are longer, the filaments of self-pollinated flowers are longer than the style, so they may recoil. They can bend backward to touch the mature stigma, thereby falling their pollen grains on the stigma. When the style is long, the filament is longer than the style, so they can recoil to come and touch the stigma to touch the mature stigma. Then the last characteristics of self-pollinated flowers I'll be talking about is that fertilization occurs inside the enclosure, and that's what we call cleistogamy. When the fertilization occurs inside the enclosure, when I talked about the pistil and stamen being enclosed in the corolla, so fertilization occurs there, so it makes it easier for self-pollination to occur, as we have in violets and wool's correct, also known as oxalis. Then we move on to talk about the characteristics of cross-pollinated flowers. What characteristics do they have that they have to undergo cross-pollination? First, the anthers mature before the stigma. So the flower is described as protandrous. When the male reproductive gamete is ready and the female is not ready, then instead of the pollen grains to be wasted, it has to transfer it to another plant. So that is why cross-pollination occurs. The anthers mature before the stigma. Then another thing that makes it like that is that the male and female parts are borne by different plants. You know, in self-pollinated plants, the plant is usually bisexual. That is, it has both the male and the female reproductive parts on the same plant or on the same flower. But in the case of cross-pollinated plants, we have male and female parts born on different plants. That is a unisexual plant. For instance, in purple. So since the male and female parts are different, self-pollination cannot occur. It has to be cross-pollination. Then the third characteristic is that the stigmas mature earlier than the anthers. Sometimes I first said the anthers mature before the stigma, and I said that is described as protandrous. But when the stigma mature earlier than the anther, the flower is described as protogynous. When the anther mature first, we call it protandrous. But when the stigma mature first, we call it protogynous, as we have in water lettuce and plantain. Then the last characteristics of cross-pollinated flower that I'll be talking about is that the female flowers are born above the male flowers. Can you imagine when the female flower is up? It's not easy for the pollen grains to now jump up or whatever to go and touch the stigma. So that's another reason. When you have the female flowers being above the male flowers, so the pollen grains may not reach the stigma of the female plant. So that is why cross-pollination will have to occur, since self-pollination of such kind of plants is not so visible. Then I want to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination. The advantages first. Advantages of self-pollination first. 1. Only small amounts of pollen need to be produced, as a little is wasted, since the plant will pollinate itself. It's still on the same plant, so there is no need for a lot of pollens to be produced. So the plant produces just a little pollen grains. Then the second advantage is that elaborate flower shapes and cross-pollination mechanisms are not necessary. There is no need to attract anybody or any plant. There is no need for that, since it's still the same flower, so it's easier. So there is no need for elaborate flower shape or cross-pollinating mechanism. Then the third is that self-pollination is certain to take place. Why is it certain? It's still the same flower, so it's easier, or the same plant. The pollen grains will fall on stigma. So it is very, very certain that self-pollination will take place. Then what about the disadvantages of self-pollination? First, the offspring may be less strong and fertile, since it's the same parent that is reproducing itself. So it's still the same weakness that we have in the parents, the same susceptibility that we have in the parents that will be manifested in the child. It may even in the offspring, the offspring may be less strong and even less fertile, since it's still the same plant that is self-pollinating itself. Then the next disadvantage is that there is less chance of producing a better type of plant by mixing different strains. Still on that same point, the chance of producing a better strain is a better offspring rather is very, very slim, since it is still the same plant that is pollinating itself. Then the self-pollination results in inheritance of a trait of a single parent. It's still the same trait that you have, so there is no improvement in self-pollination. What about advantages and disadvantages of cross-pollination? First, more seeds are formed in cross-pollination. That's an advantage. More seeds are formed. Then the second, the seed obtained is usually more stronger and more vigorous, since it's two individuals that are coming together, so they are stronger than the individual parents. That's what happens. Then the offspring are more fertile. The offspring of the cross-pollinated plants are more fertile. Then it introduces the traits of both parents in the offspring. So you have a mixture of both parents, parents A and B, in the offspring. So there is a better product that we have. Then the disadvantages of cross-pollination. First, it is less certain that it will take place. It's not a guaranteed process. So it's less certain that it will take place, because when the anther of a particular plant matures, the stigma of the other plant that you want to cross-pollinate with may not be ready. So it's less certain that cross-pollination will take place. Then it is wasteful of pollens, because the pollens will have to travel from one plant to the other. In the process of transportation, a lot will be lost. So there is wasteful, it causes wastefulness of pollens. Then the third is that it needs a more complicated flower structure. There is need for a complicated flower structure for cross-pollination to happen than in self-pollination. So it needs a complicated flower structure or shape for cross-pollination to occur. What are the agents of pollination? Pollen from the stamens may reach the stigma by any of these 4 agents or agencies. Agents of pollination, we have wind, animal, water, and growth of parts against each other. When we are talking about pollination, how does the pollens get to the stigma? They have to be moved by an agent, and the agent could either be wind, animal, water, or growth of parts. Wind disperses grains from when the flowers have no leaves. When the trees have flowers but no leaf, the wind can carry the pollens from a particular plant to another plant. Then animals like insects, birds, take pollens too. When they, in the process of their own feeding on the pollens of some flowers, they carry some remains to another plant, thereby causing pollination to happen. Then water. Pollens can float on water surface. For instance, when there is rain or you do irrigation on your farm, so some pollens can be carried on water surface to reach the ripe stigmas of another plant, as we have in water lily. Then another thing is that a part of a plant can grow to reach another part. For instance, when the anther grows, or the filament, it's the filament that has the anther carries the pollen. So when the filament grows to, there was a time I was talking about the coiling of the filaments. That's when the filament is longer than the style. So for instance, when the filament grows to an extent that it can reach the style of another flower, that can also be an agent of pollination. So 4 agents of pollination, we have wind, animal, water, and growth of parts against each other. So what are the characteristics of wind-pollinated flowers? First, they are usually small and inconspicuous. So when they are small, the wind can easily carry them. And they are often borne in large inflorescence, as we have in maize. Then, wind-pollinated flowers do not produce nectar. They are scentless. They don't have odor. They don't have any attracting smell. Then they are not brightly colored. They are dull, so wind can carry them. Then they have no particular shape. Numerous pollens are produced by their anthers because only small portion reach the receptive stigma. In the process of wind just blowing, some will be lost, a lot will be lost in the process. So they have to produce numerous pollens. Another characteristic of wind-pollinated flower is that their pollen are usually smooth-walled. They have dry and light weight so that they can easily be carried by the air currents. When they are light, the air currents can easily carry them. The example of plants that have wind-pollinated flowers, we have maize, rice, millet, wheat, and oats. If you look at all these plants, they have very, very light weight. Their flowers are very light weight, so wind can easily blow them. Rice, maize, millet, wheat, and oats, and they are cereals too. So they have lightweight and they are not brightly colored, so they can be easily carried by wind. Then characteristics of insect-pollinated flowers. First, they are usually large and conspicuous because they will attract. They have to attract the insect. The color has to attract the insect. This shape, the insect will be like, wow, what is this? So they have to be large and very conspicuous, as we have in Bougainvillea. I know you must have seen Bougainvillea situation before. It has very, very bright colored flower, and they are quite big. Then they contain nectar and are often scented. That also will attract the flower. When it's specific that, oh, there is a sweet smell around this place, so the insects will be attracted to such a plant, as we have in hibiscus flower and we have in flamboyant flower. In fact, the name says it's flamboyant because it's so brightly colored. Then they are brightly colored petals and sepals, which attract insects and birds for pollination. So their colors are very, very attractive to the insects or the bird that want to pollinate them. Also, they are specially shaped to provide landing platform for pollination of particular insects. They are shaped in a particular way that helps the insect or the bird on landing to have a landing platform So they'll be able to land on the plants, take the pollens and transfer it in their own process of feeding. Then in this kind of pollination, they produce small quantities of pollens because it's not carried by wind, so it will not be wasted in the process. So they produce relatively small quantities of pollens. Then stigmas of insect-pollinated flowers are broad, they are rounded and lobed with sticky surfaces. So they have sticky surfaces on which the pollen grains can easily adhere. That is, the surfaces are sticky, like gummy in nature. So when the pollens fall, it can easily adhere, that is, can easily gum to the surface. Then the pollens are usually thick-walled and stick to enable them adhere firmly to the bodies of visiting insects. You know, sometimes it's just that in the process of the insect feeding or visiting the plants, the pollens just get stick to the body of the insect. So when the insect gets to feed on another plant, the pollen might fall on another plant and thereby causing pollination to happen.